Okay, so I did think of something else we need to discuss, and that is um, shutting down. So when I said to you that a perfect competition, we're going to have more suppliers enter the market, we're going to get to this point of productive efficiency at the bottom of the average total cost, at the lowest possible average total cost, and also at a point where profit equals zero, economic profit equals zero, not accounting profit, economic profit, which means that the opportunity costs have been covered, and we're making nothing above and beyond that, but we are covering all of our costs, including the implied costs. That's what we consider in economic profit. But you would still say to yourself, why do we continue to operate when profit is equal to zero? Or would we continue to operate? Well, I mean, if we overshoot this, as we frequently will, because these things take time, they take lag. We do have perfect information for buyers and sellers, but we could overshoot, right? We could move here to a price point that brings our demand curve down here, right? Now we've got a marginal revenue curve, and this is also our average revenue, the revenue per unit, the price, and this is the demand curve. So when this is here, right, we've got a point here where we are touching. So we've got a whole range here where what's happening is some portion of our fixed cost is being covered, right? So if we overshoot the market, we have too many suppliers, we could wind up at a point down here, down here, down here, anywhere until about here. And I'm going to tell you why. But there's a band within there where we're still covering some of our fixed costs, right? This is going to be our fixed cost. The difference between this is going to be our fixed cost. The difference between our average total cost and our average variable cost is going to be our fixed cost, right? So at any point in here, we are still covering some portion of that fixed cost. So we're better off operating at the profit maximizing level, even though we're losing a little bit. We're not covering our variable costs, but we are covering part of our fixed costs, which means the cost that we would have to pay one way or the other. So if we produce nothing, we'll have to pay them. So at least here we're selling something and we're getting a bit of that cost covered until we get down to this point. And so we call this the shutdown point. Shutdown point. And why is that? Why is that? Because here we are touching our average variable cost. So if we go any further down than this, we're actually losing money. We're not even covering our fixed costs. At anything that's below the intersection between, the point where we're intersecting with our average variable costs. At that point, we're indifferent. We've just barely covered our fixed costs. That's it. There is no more. Now, if it goes, so that is the shutdown point. It's the point of, you could also call it the point of indifference. Point of indifference. Right? Where our production is all it's doing is covering our fixed costs. So the factory that we're operating in, we're paying for the rent or whatever it happens to be. We're paying for the rent on our space, but that's all we're covering. Rent, utilities, whatever. So we would have to pay that anyway. So why bother doing the work? Right? Why bother even coming to work if that's all you're doing is covering that cost? What you might as well do at that point is try to get out of your lease, save yourself some money, right? If you're at this point. So that's why we call this the shutdown point, right? The shutdown point. So if that is the shutdown point, if that's the place where, we would shut down the operation, then at any point along here we could have a demand curve intersecting, right? So what we have here is a supply curve for the firm. Every point that we could possibly touch along this line with our demand curve above the shutdown point is where we would be willing to supply more than zero. So this is the supply curve for the firm. Now you're going to see this in perfect competition. You're going to see that we're able to develop a supply curve there, but just keep that in mind. But another thing to recognize is that, if you get too many suppliers entering the market and people are starting to lose money, we're down here, then you're going to see people exiting the market. And when we see suppliers exiting the market, we're going to see the supply curve move this way, which is going to put upward pressure on the price, which is going to move this up, which is again going to bring us positive economic profit, which will mean then again more people will enter the market, and it'll waver just like that. Never forget that we're talking about a system here where we have no barriers to entry at all. We're imagining something in theory because, usually to open just about anything, there's some barrier to entry. I mean, you have to at least get the capital together, be able to scrape up the money in order to be able to start the business or whatever. In most things, there is a barrier to entry, whether it is financial, capital related, or something that has to do with the government, a patent, or some sort of legal framework that prevents other people from entering. There's none of that here. So anyone could just enter this industry, right? So that means that this can fluctuate and this will waver back and forth. But generally speaking, it is going to come to an equilibrium at a point like this, where, the firm is covering its average total cost. So we're basically going to find ourselves here. Now, when we talk about equilibriums, I just want to make this point because we talked about those in supply and demand. We talk about them all the time in economics. I don't want you to think of an equilibrium as a stable situation for the market, because there is no such thing, right? Think about what we're doing here. We're reducing something. This is incredibly reductive. We're reducing all consumers to this one line. We're reducing all businesses to this line, and we're saying this is how they interact. So, if you were to observe this market in the short term over time, it would fluctuate back and forth. But what we're saying is that in the long run, it's going to sit around this type of a point where we're at our minimum average total cost, which makes for allocative efficiency and or makes for productive efficiency, and where the economic benefit is maximized. The economic surplus is maximized for all participants in the economy. So we get that result from our perfectly competitive market. So that's that. Make sure you're aware of this fact of a supply curve being the marginal cost curve above the intersection with the average variable cost curve. That's generally what we're talking about, that being our shutdown point. Think for yourself about this way that the market works, and just remember for yourself that a perfect competition is generally going to lead to a situation, an equilibrium, where economic profit is reduced to zero, where the perfectly competitive firm is selling at the point of its average total cost of what it costs to produce.